Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute promoting a free and virtuous society. I'm Mark Townsend, producer. You can find additional resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as previous episodes of Acton Line at acton.org/podcasts. If you have a comment or an idea for a future episode, you can email us at podcast@acton.org. Acton Line is available to stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and acton.org. This episode of Acton Line was recorded at Acton University, our flagship conference. Acton University is a 4-day exploration of theology, philosophy, entrepreneurship, international development, and market-based economics. Each day is filled with thought-provoking presentations on the intellectual and practical foundations of a free society. At Acton University, you can sharpen your intellect, expand your worldview, and learn the foundations of genuine human flourishing. To learn more, visit university.acton.org.
Welcome. My name is Dan Huger, Librarian and Research Associate at the Acton Institute. Today I'm joined by Marcel van Hattem. Marcel is a Brazilian politician, journalist, and political scientist who has been elected as federal representative of the State of Rio Grande do Sul in Brasilia. Last year, he was chosen as leader of his party, Partido Novo. We'll be talking about the economic and political situation in Brazil today, and both Brazil's challenges and opportunities. Welcome, Marcel, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for the work you've been doing at Acton and Acton Institute itself.
Yeah, thank you for all of your work, and thank you for introducing a lot of this audience to Brazil for the first time. There are a lot of Americans, we're in Michigan here. Most folks in Michigan have real-life experience of Canada. There are other regions of the country in the Southwest where most of those Americans have a real-life experience of going to Mexico, visiting Mexico. But a lot of Americans see South America in general, and Brazil in particular, just through movies and through films and through sort of those sorts of things. They know that there are beaches in Rio, and they know, in school they learn about the Amazon rainforest, but their knowledge is very shallow. Could you give us a sort of Brazilian's picture of Brazil to sort of open up and give our listeners some context?
Yes, definitely. Well, not to mention samba, carnival, right?
Yeah.
That's very popular in Brazil, but not in the whole country. Of course, it is a holiday across Brazil. Mm-hmm. Some places, including my state, Rio Grande do Sul, Carnival until some time ago was not really a holiday. There were other holidays instead, mm-hmm. like in my hometown, Dois Irmãos, which was a German settlement in the past, and there's still people who speak German in the mm-hmm. streets in my city. Not that many, but there are still. The real holiday is to celebrate the immigrants that came from Germany to Rio Grande do Sul, to that specific location called Dois Irmãos in 1829. Mm-hmm. So we have a very diverse population, to the point that some people look at me here in America, that's funny, and they look at me and say, hey, but you don't look Brazilian. Yeah. And then I answer back, yeah, but you don't look American either.
That's true.
Because in the end, we are also a melting pot like America is. But people have this impression that, Brazil has the people with this kind of skin color, and they're tall like this. And this is not really true. We have a very diverse population, big population. Maybe we should start with that.
Yeah.
220 million inhabitants almost. So mm-hmm. It's the largest country in the Americas after the United States, yeah. And we're not that far behind. We have 49% of South America's territory, mm-hmm. And more than 50% of the gross domestic product in South America as well. And if we look at Brazil geographically, you are right. It's very well known for the beaches because a big share of the population lives across the coastline, which counts about 5,000 miles.
Yeah.
It's a huge country. And its capital is not Buenos Aires,
No.
but Brasilia. And this is a joke that we do because many Americans, when asked what is the capital of Brazil, will not know it's Brasilia. Sometimes they even say São Paulo, which is a city in Brazil. It's the largest city in the country, the financial capital of Brazil, we could say. But the capital of the country is right in the middle. Is a city called Brasilia, in the middle of nowhere, because it was nothing like 60, 70 years ago when they decided to build Brasilia. And Buenos Aires is the capital of our neighboring country, Argentina.
Yeah. So I know when I was growing up, my dad was an architect. And so I knew a lot about Brasilia's construction because he was interested in these sort of urban
My mother's an
planning
architect
projects.
too.
Oh, wonderful.
And my father's civil engineer.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
When we talk about that ethnic composition of Brazil and these waves of sort of immigration, in the United States we have indigenous peoples here. We have waves of immigration from Northern Europe, and then waves of immigration from Central Europe, and then waves of immigration from Southern Europe, and then waves of immigration from all over the world. What's that pattern in Brazil's history? Was it primarily Portuguese settlers first, and then how did other Europeans and other peoples come to Brazil?
Great question, and it's good to start right there at the beginning. I mean, start where the settlement began. So differently than America, America was actually colonized by people who were escaping the government in England, right? So people that wanted religious freedom and other freedoms abroad. Well, Brazil has a different story. Brazil was colonized by the Portuguese government. So the government came before in Brazil, before even that there were real people, I mean, in the sense that we have now the population. Of course, there was the indigenous people, but I'm talking about people that come from abroad. And in America, we see that all institutions were therefore built from bottom up, right? And then you have the gathering of 13 colonies and so on and so forth. Whereas in Brazil is exactly the opposite. Like there was government before there was people. So everything, the institutions were being built upside down or top to the bottom. And it's very interesting to notice one difference that is very striking between America and Brazil is that most of the taxes in Brazil go first to the federal government. More than 60% of all national revenue in taxes go first to Brasilia to be then later redistributed to states and municipalities. Sometimes, or most of the times, the money never arrives because, so many people have to decide where this money is going, some put it in their pockets and so on, that Brazil is not really a country where you see at the local level the creativity being valued with the money that it creates, that it gives to society, because it goes to Brasilia first. So this is a very striking difference. However, we had many cultures being brought to Brazil during the centuries. So we had we had the French and the Dutch, for instance, in the 17th century. They were also expelled from the country later, a series of reasons. But it's important to notice that the Dutch helped the Brazilian in the Northeast to start a financial consciousness, because the Dutch were very good at financing and making the money make money, right? But this was more in the 17th century. But later, especially in the 19th century, many people think that the immigration from Europe started after the World War. No, that's not true. I mean, of course, after the World War, especially to Argentina and other countries, Brazil as well, there were some people that escaped Europe because of the Second World War, but that was a in very small numbers. What we really had was this afflux of immigrants during the so-called empire in Brazil. That's in the 20th century, 19th century. And this is when Brazil was independent from Portugal, but the emperor of Brazil was the son of the king of Portugal.
Yeah.
And afterwards the second, the son of this emperor. So Dom Pedro I, Dom Pedro I, and Dom Pedro II. And this is when there were many immigrants coming, especially from Germany in my state, people that were escaping the famine in Germany. Italy, especially after the reunification in the end of the 19th century, there were these wars. But we have many, many, many other cultures like Polish, Czech, well, you name it.
Yeah.
And Japanese, for instance, they have the largest colony outside Japan is in Brazil. I have many Chinese too. Lebanese. There are more Lebanese living in Brazil right now, or people from Lebanese origin, than in Lebanon. I mean, then the whole population in Lebanon. Yeah. It's crazy. So we're really a melting pot. And that's why I tell people when they ask me, you don't look Brazilian, say you don't look American. Because in the end, what is it to be American or is it to be a Brazilian? It's more like the attachment to the country, really, and it doesn't really have to relate to a specific phenotype. My family, my father is Dutch. He was born in the Netherlands. The Dutch started coming to Brazil in this new wave in the beginning of the 20th century. But my father himself, he's son of a Dutch passport. He's already passed away. And they came in the 60s. So it was a complete... He came to Brazil as a missionary, right? Sort of. So he came to Brazil to be pastor in the Lutheran Church in the state of Paraná, which is in a former Dutch kind of, settlement, which is today a city in the countryside of that state.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
One of the other sort of unique aspects of Brazil is its Lusophone heritage. It's a Portuguese-speaking nation. It is, in fact, the largest Portuguese-speaking population in Brazil. How has that been? That's a unique. That sets it apart from the rest of not all of Latin America. There are some French-speaking portions of Latin America, but Americans tend to think of Latin America as Spanish-speaking. And Brazil is a nation of immense size that is not a Spanish-speaking nation. How does that Portuguese, we talked about the Portuguese colonial heritage a little bit, how does that Portuguese linguistic heritage affect Brazilian sort of culture, national life, and its relationship with other nations in South America?
Well, Brazil, that indeed is true. Like, the Portuguese were very competent in keeping the country united, and there were many revolts in Brazil in the past, as there were also in the other Spanish countries, or Spanish-speaking countries. But in the Spanish-speaking countries, we saw that these local revolts, led to new countries, right? So you see that Brazil is one piece, and then all these other countries, about 10, 11, 12. Also, there is the Suriname that was Dutch, and the British Guiana. But in the end, most of the other countries, all of the others are Spanish-speaking countries. And in Brazil, the Portuguese crown was very effective in keeping the country united together. Also because, as I told you, most of the population lives in the coast, and that means also that most of the economic activity was in the coast, and the coast was very united as well in a sense. So there were revolts in São Paulo, there were revolts in the Northeast. My state declared independence, and for 10 years we had a sort of a farroupilha state in the south of Brazil. But the Brazilian army that was in 1845 was also very competent to dissolve the rebellion. So and Brazil has another characteristic which is very interesting. We have our head towards Europe and America. There's the ocean, of course, between us. And we have our backs to the Spanish-speaking countries. So there is this discussion, is Brazil part of Latin America or not? I remember there's always been a discussion. Of course, geographically it is, and we share many things in common. But Brazilians tend to look more to America and Europe, to say Argentina or Paraguay or Chile and so on. It's an interesting trend.
Yeah. Going forward.
Yeah.
Now that we have some context here, Brazil's recent political history has been very turbulent.
Yeah.
Could you bring us, introduce our American listeners to sort of what the last sort of half century of Brazilian political life has been?
Wow.
I mean, not again, but in broad strokes, because I think it's very important to understand the events of today that we're going to be discussing. Yeah.
Well, it's very important. I mean, first to have in mind that not every political system is the same. In fact, political systems differ from country to country. So America has a president. There are some countries that have prime ministers. Actually, most of Europe has, and Asia and other countries. Some have a president-elect as the head of state. Some have the monarch still as a figure that unites the country and so on. Brazil has its institutions to a large extent copied from the institutions of the United States. So it's easier to understand. Right? So we have a president that is elected by the people. We have House and Senate in the federal level. Senate, we have 3 senators per state instead of 2 that the United States has. We have also lesser states, 26 states and a federal district. And in the federal district, they have representatives, so taxation with representation, I'd say.
Unlike Washington, D.C. here.
But also like the Washington, D.C. area, Brasilia has the largest GDP in the country and doesn't produce much, except for laws and bureaucracy for the others to follow. But anyways, so we have a president elected by the president elected by the population. We have a House and Senate and a Supreme Court, federal level. Okay, the difference here is first that. Given our history, we're rather than a unitary state. We're rather a unitary state than a federation. It's curious because the Brazil went as far as to, in the last constitution of 1988, we have had 7 already. So in our last constitution of 1988, after the military regime ended, we included municipalities as also a part of the federation. So we have in the federation the municipalities, 5,600 almost. We have the 26 states and the federal district as a part of the federation. And we have what we call the union, which is the federal level. And in spite of that, because you would think, so you have no municipalities, so they also can have their laws. Yes, they can. But in spite of that, municipalities have not that much what they can rule about. State level either. I mean, criminal law, for instance, is all federal.
Okay, yeah.
So in the United States, it's very different. So here you can have different laws according to the state. In Brazil, all criminal and civil law is federal. So there are some things that the state can do, especially when it comes to their revenues. So commerce tax is state, like here in America. Property tax, especially your house and so on, is local, but the rest is all federal. And that's why, differently than the United States, the president has so much power in Brazil. Of course, you would think, but the American president is a pretty powerful person. Yeah, that's right. But it's more for international relations, it's more from the country to the outside than really in the inside, because the local level and the state level have a lot of power here in the United States. I mean, the presidential power, I've been studying it not that much. You surely know more than I do about that. But I know that the presidential power in America has also been growing internally in the last decades, right?
Yes.
But it's way different than what the case is in Brazil. So we have this federal level that is very, very strong. And then we have a Supreme Court that is getting stronger and stronger by the day. And why is that? I'm going to theorize a little bit here probably, but first, the legislative branch has lost interest in legislating.
As it has here.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are my colleagues interested in? In perks, in earmarks. So they want money to send their constituencies because they want to get reelected. As Thomas Sowell once said, right? Like the first priority of a politician is to get elected, and the second and third is being reelected. Whatever else is their priority comes way down bottom in the bottom of the list. So what makes somebody reelected, not only in Brazil but in other states, if you give like short-term benefits to your electorate. So the executive branch is strong in a sense that the president has many powers, but at the same time, when you see what happened with Bolsonaro during his term, that he was highly persecuted by the Supreme Court that enlarged its power not only towards the legislative branch, legislating indeed, but also towards the executive power, you will understand where we are now. So everything that Bolsonaro did, that the mainstream media or the left or, people who disliked him, everything he did that these guys thought, we can do something about it and diminish his power, right? The Supreme Court would interfere. The Supreme Court will indict I don't know would tell Bolsonaro, you have 24 hours to answer us. Why did you introduce that specific public policy, for instance? Or they would prevent him to nominate somebody to be his state secretary or minister, as we call it in Brazil. In America, state secretaries need to pass a Senate, right? Hearings and so on. In Brazil, it's at full discretion of the president. It is written in the Constitution. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court would interfere in this kind of decisions made by the president. And now what we have is a Supreme Court. Look at that. It's good that you're seated because then you don't fall behind. I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States has about 100 cases per year, more or less, 100 cases, right? And nothing is televised, right? So it's not secret, but it's closed doors, and afterwards they come with a decision. Well, in Brazil, I think this is a big mistake. Everything is televised. So every discussion and so on in the plenary sessions, as we call it, of the Supreme Court is televised. So whereas in the United States, the Supreme Court has about 100 cases a year, in Brazil, it's about 100,000 cases. For 11 justices. So 100,000 cases a year, it's completely impossible. And this is because it's not only a Supreme Court anymore for the Constitution, a constitutional court. It deals with many other kinds of cases, including criminal cases against members of Parliament, for instance. So all members of Parliament, all members of the House and the Senate, if they commit any crime, if they're a suspect of having, I don't know, even a civil offense against, they are judged by the Supreme Court.
So I never thought about this, but if criminal law is federal, and if civil law is federal, you're going to get that sort of the court has access to render judgments in those situations in a way that there are all sorts of cases that would just never come under the purview of the United States Supreme Court, the way that our civil and criminal law is. we have this similar pattern in the United States of, on the one hand, a legislature abdicating its duties, and then executive and court filling the gaps and taking increasingly prominent roles in American public life. What role, we've talked about the courts, the legislature, and the executive a little bit. Are the parties strong in Brazil? Because often, at various times in the history of the United States, the parties have been stronger or weaker and had more or less influence over the government. And sometimes there are charismatic leaders that overwhelm them or transform them in this sort of way. How do parties function in the Brazilian political system?
Let me just go one step back to the previous question. I want just to add one thing, and then I go back to the parties. In Brazil, there's something called privilege forum. What does it mean? That members of Congress are going to be judged if something happened, if they committed a crime, by the Supreme Court. I told you this already, but just repeating it because it is important to understand that this was thought as a good thing in the sense that, if you have a Supreme Court deciding over a criminal case of a representative, or say something he did against the general public in a decision of a public policy or something, it was intended as a good thing because it will be faster to come to a conclusion whether he's criminal or not, because his victims are the whole population, right?
Yeah.
So it should be faster. But in the end, what happens is that because Supreme Court members are appointed by the President of the Republic and confirmed by the Senate, these guys, they put their friends in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
That's one. And secondly, they don't want to be subject to a trial by these guys if they commit any crime. So they also act as friends during their term. So in the end, we saw in the last election for the Senate, not the last one, but the previous one, the Speaker of the Senate was elected with a margin of votes that was not that big, because there was the population knows that to impeach justices of the Supreme Court, it is necessary to have a majority in the Senate. But these justices came as far as to call senators to ask for their votes in favor of their candidate for the presidency of the Senate.
Oh,
yeah.
Whoa.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they really act politically today. And going out to the parties. So, again, this is a big difference now with the United States. As I told you, we are a copy of the United States institution-wise to some extent. But when it comes to political parties, we're very different. We don't have a district voting system. That means that my state, Rio Grande do Sul, could have 31 districts, right? Because we are 31 representatives. Well, not really. Should be 29. That's the whole different discussion. Interesting one.
Yeah.
We don't have, like in the United States, a minimum of 1 representative per state. We have the minimum of 8 and a maximum of 70, which is bad.
Oh, maximum.
This is bad.
Oh, yeah. This is in India. They have
similar.
Well, they have the census has become a hot button political issue in India because there hasn't been a census in a very long time because it would involve shifting districts. So the representatives are not parceled out equally to different regions. And I could see a similar effect in Brazil when you cap.
Exactly, and there was a censor now. Well, I'm going to tell a brief story about that too. So we have the maximum of 70. It means that São Paulo, which is the largest state, should have 115 representatives and can have only 70. And there are a series of states that should be having like 2 or 3, 4 representatives and have 8. This destroys the concept of democracy of one man, one vote, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the House of Representatives is the house of the people. The Senate is the house of the states. So there is normal to have like 2, or in our case, 3 senators per state. You're not talking about proportion. But in the House, we have this distortion, right? And what happened in the last days is that the House and the Senate, in fact, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the Senate approved, and then the House confirmed. And the House voted the first time also in favor. An increase in the number of representatives from 513 to 531. And the story is very interesting, a little bit like your India story, I think. So there was a census, and some states should have more representatives and some should have less. Like the case of Pará and Maranhão. Pará has a larger population than Maranhão. There are 2 Brazilian states. And in spite of that, it has 17 representatives, while Maranhão has 18. So they had a whole new table provided for by the Supreme Electoral Court, which is a part of the Supreme Federal Court. 4 of the justices of the Supreme Electoral Court comes from the Supreme Court, and the president must also be somebody from the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court controls the Electoral Court, something that you don't know.
Yes.
You don't have it in America.
Yeah.
So in fact, the judiciary controls democracy in Brazil in the sense of the elections, really.
Yeah.
Right? So they decided that because of the census, such state had to have more representatives, and that state had to have less, right? So, and they threatened, that's the word, the Congress, saying that if you don't vote it by July this year, we are going to decide, because somebody has to decide. I don't know where they get this from, like somebody has to decide, but, you know, that's also anti-democratic, because if the House doesn't want to decide, I mean, it's the House decision, but whatever. They decided. But because some were losing and nobody wants to lose, and some were gaining, do you know what they decided? That everybody that got to lose would not lose anything. And who would gain will gain.
So they just added.
So now we have 531 representatives from next elections onwards, and that was just decided in the Brazilian Congress. It's almost a Solomonic decision in a very perverted way.
So to get back to
the parties, right? We were talking about the parties.
Yeah, because you have these sort of quid pro quos between presidents and the court and this sort of thing. Are those friendships? Are those sort of is that sort of corruption? Does that sort out along party lines, and do you have certain parties jockeying?
Yes. Yeah. So my state, 31 representatives, they're all elected in party lists.
Okay. Yeah.
But the lists are not done by the party. The list is done by the elector, by the voter. That means that you vote for Marcel or vote for John or, Mary, not knowing many times that he's from that party. Oh, the number is in front. I mean, every party has a number. We vote in machines.
Yep.
So the number of my party, 30. And the next 2 numbers is my candidate number as federal representative. So somebody votes for me because it typed the number of my party first. The vote counts for my party. And then depending on the number of the votes my party got in the entire state, we know how many seats my party has in the proportion. And that makes our system be a multi-partisan system instead of a bipartisan, like is the case of the United States. When you have districts, normally you have lesser parties. It's the case of the United States. It's the case of England, for instance, right? Or Great Britain. In the case of Brazil, because we have this multi-party system, we have about 15, if I'm not mistaken, parties now in Congress. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that there are 15 ideologies. Okay. Actually, ideological parties, you would find like 2 very ideological parties, is my party on the right, and PSOL, the socialists, on the left. Then you have maybe 3 or 4 parties that are highly ideological, but you see that they sometimes compromise if they, compromise in the sense that compromise principles when they need to attain something. That would be kind of the Lula's party. That will be Bolsonaro's party. Maybe PDT, PSP. There's another two like worker parties, socialist parties, and then you have the rest, which is called in Brazil centrão. In other words, the big centrum.
Yeah.
And these parties, they are mainly like what we call physiological. That means that they are really interested more in assessing public funds, accessing public privileges, patrimonialism, clientelism, and all these, isms of the political science. And they are much more interested in business, really, in taking care of their own lives and being reelected and making money. They do a lot of money. There's high corruption in Brazil, of course. And this involves right now also the judiciary in Brazil to a large extent.
Okay.
And this is where the situation got really bad in the country when the Operation Car Wash in 2019.
Yes.
Maybe I should get into that.
Yes, that would be great.
So the Operation Car Wash before that in 2015 and onwards was the largest operation in the history in Brazil against corrupt politicians and corrupt businessmen, especially businessmen in the oil and gas sector and in the construction sector. So many people became whistleblowers, started to tell and show evidence and proof of what they were telling. They told who were the politicians involved, how much money they got, to the point that Lula, the current president, was put in jail for the crimes he committed, according to the Brazilian judiciary. So they have evidence against him and against the party leaders of basically all main parties in this called Centrão, right? Businessmen alike and so on. But in 2019, Operation Car Wash got to the Supreme Court. That means that one of the whistleblowers, one of the most important, a guy from the construction company called Odebrecht, that is also implicated in corruption scandals in other countries like Peru, Panama, and so on. This guy said that at that time, president of the Supreme Court, Dias Toffoli, was receiving bribes from his company, and the name of him, the justice of the Supreme Court, in his bribes list was the friend of my father, making reference to his father, the whistleblower's father, who was actually the owner and the founder of the company, who was friends with Lula, who was friends with the Supreme Court justice, who was in 2019 the president of the court. So when that news came out and was printed in first page of a magazine called Cruzoé, the friend of my father. Yeah. And the picture of this justice was also on the cover of that magazine. The Supreme Court understood that Operation Car Wash went too far. And they decided to censor the magazine for spreading fake news. Yeah. At that time in 2019, the legacy media was shocked with that, said you cannot do that. This is censorship. Yeah. And the court decided to back down. It's interesting to note also that inquiry that resulted in the censorship of that magazine had already had already as rapporteur Justice Alexandre de Moraes. And he was simply appointed by Dias Toffoli, the president of the Supreme Court, to be the rapporteur, which is completely unlawful too, because a judge cannot appoint somebody. You're going to be the rapporteur of the case, right? So this is where it all started in 2019. So the legacy media back down, made them back down for a bit. But that was April 2019, just 4 months after Bolsonaro was elected president. And because Bolsonaro was seen as such a threat for the deep state, for the system, for the left, for the media, and he indeed, he fought with everybody, right? Yeah. he fought many battles at the same time. Maybe that's something that if he were president again, he wouldn't do like he did. So he made many people upset.
Yeah.
Not that he wasn't right, but that was, of course, the outcome. And they all united against Bolsonaro and decided that they would do anything that they could to prevent him from winning the next election in 2022.
Yeah.
And this is where the situation got worse and worse towards Bolsonaro and his supporters first. Persecution, censoring, inquiries, endless inquiries. And this inquiry that was open in April 2019, it's still open.
Yeah.
So you see that now, after Bolsonaro left the presidency and he was defeated by Lula in a highly controversial election because he was censored during the election. I mean, Bolsonaro many times. He couldn't say Lula was friends with Maduro and Ortega. The media was censored for defaming Lula. And it was a complete truth.
Yeah.
I mean, they are friends.
Yeah.
And so on. So he was indeed like he lost the elections, but because the court interfered so much in the process, and even though he's out of power now more than 2 years, they keep persecuting him. He's under trial now in Brazil. He cannot run because the court said he's ineligible, and they want to put him in jail and his supporters too. So you see that what they really, really want is, and they can't, but they don't want only to defeat Bolsonaro, as actually one member of the Supreme Court, who is now the president of the court, publicly once said that they defeated Bolsonaro in the last election. He did it publicly. Like he said too much, but he did. The same guy said also that the court became a political body, if you believe it. He said in an event where he was a speaker. So they continue persecuting now Bolsonaro and Bolsonaristas, not because they want to just defeat them, but we want to destroy them.
So this...
As if that was possible.
Yeah. And this censorship has gotten some coverage in the English language press. Not enough, because it's very draconian.
It is.
It's the sort of thing that would be unimaginable in the United States. And for that matter, in many other countries. The United States has a very uniquely robust free speech tradition.
Yeah.
And a constitutional amendment that guarantees it. Does Brazil have any, at least on paper, constitutional protections to free speech that the court is ignoring in doing these sorts of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brazil has free speech for members of parliament in Article 53. We have free speech in Article 5, and if I'm not mistaken, 220.
Yeah.
Against all kind of censorship, especially because we passed periods of censorship in the past in Brazil. This is not new.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not new for many countries. Censorship is... Those who are in power, they don't want to be criticized. This is just human nature, right? You're in power, you don't want people to be... You have to be very strong and sure of yourself if you want to hear criticisms of your own deeds and, things you say. But it is there to protect democracy, to protect free speech and so on. But the Supreme Court ignores it completely. And this is why I think the coverage of American media should indeed be bigger about what's going in Brazil, because it can happen here. I know you have a free speech protection that is way, larger than anywhere else in the world. But unfortunately, American authorities contributed to the situation in Brazil.
Let's talk about that, because this is where it sort of became where you got the most reporting on this issue was the way that social media firms were involved in this. Could you unpack this a little bit?
Well, imagine that if a social media firm like X is blocked in Brazil to use of any Brazilian, and the justice in charge in the case, Alexandre de Moraes, decides to block or freeze the assets not of X, because it didn't have any in Brazil, but of Starlink SpaceX instead.
Yeah.
This is criminal. This is complete nonsense. And the American embassy at the time didn't say a word about it in defense of somebody who is an American, right?
Yep.
Elon Musk.
An American companies.
And an American companies. This is totally different now under Trump. This is why we welcomed so much this change in the administration. I know there are people that have issues with either Biden or Trump, but in that matter, Trump has been doing a great job in protecting the freedom of speech of American people. And this is why now, under his administration, we see that some things are different in Brazil as well. So Rumble was blocked, and when Pedro Vaca, the rapporteur for freedom of expression of OAS, went to Brazil, Alexandre de Moraes decided to unblock the social media Rumble in Brazil.
Yeah, this is a video streaming service.
It's a video streaming service, indeed. Yeah. And he tries persistently to censor Brazilians who are here in the United States. So there are Brazilians who are living here, and their accounts are blocked in Brazil, their social media accounts. Also, their assets are frozen and so on. And they are already living here in the United States. In fact, there is a Brazilian who now has American citizenship called Flávia Magalhães.
Yes.
And she has an order of arrest against her by Alexandre de Moraes because of posts on her social media in which she disputed or criticized the voting system in Brazil. So it's all very 1984. It's Orwellian. It's crazy the level of surveillance. And it's also interesting to notice that in all these cases, or in many of these cases, Justice Alexandre de Moraes is the one who's being criticized on social media. So he is the victim. He is the investigator. And he is the judge of the same case. That can be.
No. Now, there are many of these stories, but one of these stories is also now your story. And I would like you to tell and share with our audience sort of the pressures that you're under now.
Okay.
And the legal, the legal pressures that are political in nature. Yeah.
Well, I've been targeted by the Supreme Court 3 times now already, or by Lula's regime rather than the Supreme Court, because actually they act together, Lula and Alexandre de Moraes, right? So the first time was during the elections of 2022. I had a video posted on my social media on the last day of the election, or 2 days before the second round, criticizing the labor prosecutors in my state because they were threatening business owners with high fines if they talked about politics with their employees during the period of the election. So they could not tell their employees what the outcomes would be for their business if Lula was elected or Bolsonaro, something that in a democracy should be completely okay. I mean, you're talking with your team and saying, look, if Lula is elected, these policies will affect my company. If Bolsonaro is elected, that policies will affect the company. But in Brazil, this is seen, and this is a Marxist view, right? That is ingrained in many institutions, including that's labor prosecutor division of the I don't know how you call it, prosecutor general or something.
Yeah, attorney general?
Attorney general, yeah, because you don't have really the prosecutor and the attorney general. That's different. You have the same person, the same position. But anyway, so you have these guys who actually oversee the relation between laborers and
arbitrators, yeah.
Could be, yeah. So in this Marxist view, when a business owner talks or even ask for votes He's abusing his economic power over the employees, and this in Brazil is forbidden, or at least, it's not very clear in the law. But of course, those who interpret the law, they are against entrepreneurship, they're against free markets, and they tend to interpret it as a abuse of economic power to talk with your employees. Well, anyway, so I criticized this in a video, and I was accused by the electoral court to attack the institutions, because I said that this kind of public division of public sector should be extinct, because if they do this kind of things, they are being anti-democratic. And I was accused of that, and my post was censored in social media. I only knew that I was censored because I received an email from YouTube, and that's another characteristics of these processes. They're all secret.
Yeah.
So you don't really know. Your lawyers don't have access to it. It's crazy. It's Kafkian,
So when YouTube did they just say it's been taken down because of a court order?
Yes. Yeah. YouTube sent me the court order, said it was been taken down, and I asked the lawyer, and maybe 4 or 5 months later, he had access to the case.
Yeah.
When the election was already long gone. But the interesting is that was the end of 2022. So in 2024, Twitter Files Brazil come up.
Yeah.
And then I finally understand the full case, because I see the discussions in Twitter's legal. At the time it was Twitter, right? About my case and about many other cases.
Yeah.
And then there I understood that I risked actually have my whole account blocked, not only on X, but in other social media, because of that one video. And the ex-lawyer replied to the court order saying, look, you send the links to that video on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, because the video is there, and you send the whole link. To us, you only send the link to his profile, x.com, I don't know, Marcel van Hattem, or twitter.com, Marcel van Hattem. But you didn't send the link with the video. And you know why? Because there is no video. He didn't post it on X.
Yeah.
So what would you think? The court maybe would just reply, okay, oh yeah, that was a mistake. So ignore that order, and and they would continue with the case with the other social media. No, that was not what their answer. They just answered, you didn't get it. You have to take down his whole profile, block it all. For a video that wasn't even posted on X.
Yeah, not even.
So that was how crazy the situation was during the elections. The state is incompetent even for censoring people. They do it wrongly. They do it. It's terrible. Yeah. So this is case number one. Case number two, and this is the most serious of all cases, is about a federal police agent who wrote a report about Felipe Martins. Felipe Martins was an old AD of Bolsonaro. Yeah. He was put in jail last year in February 2024. And he was put in jail because he supposedly had helped Bolsonaro writing a coup menu, as if somebody would give a coup and write
instructions.
A menu. Yeah, terrible. Yeah, right, and put it out. But that's their narrative. That is how crazy their narrative is. And he was put in jail, not exactly for that, but because he allegedly had fled the country or left the country in 2022, the end of the year, together with Bolsonaro. 2 days before Lula took office, Bolsonaro came to Florida, United States. Yep. He came with an entourage, family, and so on. And indeed, Felipe Martins was in one of the lists of passengers, but not a final list.
Okay.
Only the tentative lists.
Yeah.
And because he didn't go.
Yeah.
But the federal police agent used information of the first lists of passengers, the draft lists, to say that because he left the country then, he should be put in jail in 2024 because he could escape the country again. So the lawyers of Felipe Martins went to the court and proved that this guy was wrong, that this federal police agent used information that was, invalid, actually was a draft passengers list. He could never have used that draft passengers list for that end. And then strangely, Justice Alexandre de Moraes, instead of releasing Felipe Martins for jail, remember he was maybe 3 weeks or 1 month in jail, he decides to ask the federal police for new diligences. And they do it. And they get from the CBP in Orlando a travel history showing that Felipe Martins did indeed enter the United States. And later they get a formal I-94 with Felipe Martins' passport. But they used an invalid passport of his. Look how gross it was.
Oh, yeah.
An invalid passport that he had been stolen or something in the past. So they didn't even falsify his entry registration with a valid document.
Yeah.
Well, he was kept in jail for about 6 months until the situation got so difficult for Alexandre de Moraes because there was no way to explain. Even Mario Grady from Wall Street Journal wrote a piece about it. International media was paying attention. Like, how is it possible?
Yeah.
And when he was released from jail, I went to his place in Paraná, like just 2 days ago. I spent the whole night until next morning, 6 a.m. He was showing me all documents on a PowerPoint and everything. And I was 100% convinced that he was, first, unlawfully put in prison, and second, that somebody in the United States has been coordinating, most probably with somebody in Brazil, to do this. So I went to the House floor that the week after he was released from jail, and after I talked with him in his home, Felipe Martins, and I said that such a federal police agent that relied in the draft passengers list and afterwards in false information from the CBP is not really a police agent. He's not an officer but a criminal. Yeah. I said his words, and I mean I'm a representative. I'm there to denounce corruption and bad behavior in public service. That's the first thing I have to do, right?
Yep.
And instead of investigating what I told in the House floor in the Tribune of the Chamber of Deputies, they decided, I mean, the federal police of Lula, to start an investigation against myself.
Yeah.
And I received an email from the federal police saying that I was to summon and give testimony to the federal police about this case because I was being charged with a criminal offense of slander against a police agent. So I decided, I looked for the Speaker of the House. I talked with him, and of course I needed a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I decided not to go to the federal police. I said I will not go. I mean, the Constitution grants me the privilege of immunity. So in this case,
and these are words that are spoken on the House floor.
Yeah, of course. But even of course. And even if I was wrong, I mean, even if I was wrong, this is my right. I mean, this is my constitutional right. This is my duty. I have to do that. And by the way, what politicians do most of the time is lying, and nothing happened to them in the House floor, right? So I'm there saying the truth, and then I'm paying the price for it? No. So I did not go, but in the end, the police finishes the investigation. Oh, by the way, we were talking about the Supreme Court and how the Supreme Court is responsible for cases involving congressmen. So the Supreme Court authorized the investigation against me.
Yeah.
And the member of the Supreme Court that authorized, because just one needs to authorize, was the former boss of all these police agents, because he was the Justice Secretary or Minister of Lula just before he became Justice in the Supreme Court. So the guy that was the boss of all these agents, that knew all of them, especially the one that I was accusing, he authorized the investigation against me. And also interesting to note, this guy, this justice that authorized, he was in the Communist Party in the past and was a governor, a representative, and a senator. So he knows what the immunity is. Yeah. It's pure persecution. So they finished the investigation and decide to indict me. So now this indictment is on the table of the Prosecutor General. The federal prosecutor general is also appointed by the president, also confirmed by the Senate. It was last year that it was confirmed. He's also somehow part of this system. His friends and the people who say business associate with one of the justices of the Supreme Court, and now it is for him to decide whether I should stand trial for this criminal offense, and then I can go to jail for a minimum of 2 years. That's what the law says.
Yeah.
Or if he's going to file, and that is what he should do, and I hope he does, because the Constitution grants me immunity. So this is the most serious of the cases.
Yeah.
And the third case is that when the Supreme Court started to publicly say, members of the Supreme Court, via the press, of course, that they would start to put to trial cases involving politicians that were against what they are doing in favor, for instance, of the amnesty of the people of January 8th in Brazil that are being persecuted, put in prison illegally, and so on. When the justices started to blackmail politicians, that's what they're doing. I call them mafia in the House floor. I said, this is something that the mafia does.
This is exactly what I'm thinking
Isn't
as
it?
you're describing the situation.
Right. So I was just defining. I was not accusing. I was just defining. Said this is something the mafia does. And guess what? A member of the party of Lula went to the Supreme Court. A colleague of mine.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine, he went to the prosecutor general and accused me of attacking democracy by calling this guy members of the mafia. So they use the state against their political opponents. I don't know what is going to happen to that case. This case still is case is there. But what I heard from some people is that actually there are some people in the south of Italy that are very offended with my comparison. And then I should care with them. Take care.
So this second case with the indictment, the most serious case.
And there can be more because they're all secrets, right? They're all under secrecy.
There can be more. If this were to go to trial, you've probably thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? I mean, we hope that this case will be dismissed.
Sure.
Because it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's unjust, and it only aids and abets corruption in Brazil. Because the only way it gets better is if people can say things.
Yeah. True.
And if people can shed light on things, and particularly if people's elected representatives need to be allowed to do that in deliberative bodies.
Yeah.
That, I mean, this is. I mean, you said it yourself. This is not only a right, but for you as a representative, it's a duty.
Definitely.
And we hope that it's dismissed, and we hope that you're allowed to continue to do your duty and to do right by your constituents and the people of Brazil. But when you think about the other alternative, a trial.
Yeah.
There's two things going on, because there's personal.
Yes.
But there's also, as a citizen, as a Brazilian, that's got to be very troubling. Could you share some of your feelings around that and your thoughts? Because it's an extremely, I mean, it's an extremely serious situation.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but first I think, what's their goal?
Yeah.
To silence me and do what they are doing and continue to be, undisturbed in their positions. Will I allow them to reach their goal? No. At least I will do my best. So if they want to silence me, my answer is I will not stop speaking. This is my first intuitive answer to what they're doing. Of course, what they do is to try to morally, psychologically mess with you. Because it's crazy. I mean, there's so much criminality in Brazil. There's so many. Actually, the criminality has been raising in Brazil in the last years under Lula. They're not politicians. There are politicians in the chamber that tell me, Marcel, why don't you engage in a corruption scheme? Because then you're gonna get out of this. That's more or less what the situation in Brazil. If you're a corrupt official, nothing will happen to you. Actually, you're probably going to get promoted somehow.
It's a protection racket.
It's a protection right now. If you're a criminal, it's good for you, you know. So the first thing is, if they think this is threatening me, of course it worries. Of course you have to take extra precautions. I mean, but it's not going to silence me.
Yeah.
The second thing after that first thing is, if they want to stop me from running to the Senate, they're also not going to. They can try. They can invent some new interpretation of the law. But indeed, at least I think that electorally it is making me stronger. Look, when Lula was elected president, I had about 450,000 followers on Instagram.
Yeah.
Now, and this was an Instagram that I created maybe 10 years ago or more. And now, 2 years later, I have almost 2 million.
Yeah.
So there are more people following me. There are more people paying attention to what I do. So I get stronger because I am reacting. There are many representatives. I'm not the only one persecuted. There are dozens. But there are many that, they just decide to keep quiet, to stop speaking. And they're not gaining public attention from it. They're actually, in my opinion, getting weaker with this. So, but again, they can interpret the law and try to, get me out of the race because I'm a threat, since I'm a candidate for the Senate, and it's the Senate who will impeach these guys next year if we have the majority. And thirdly, if they want to put me in jail, which could also be the case, jailing me for, I don't know. I think there would be a very bad public opinion reaction in the first place.
Yeah.
Because people look at me and know that, I'm not a thief or somebody to be put in jail, or dishonest man or whatever. Yeah. And secondly, in Brazil, if a representative is put in jail, the Congress has to confirm.
Okay.
And they did once with one guy called Daniel Silveira. That was in 2020. He did a very bad video with bad words. He said terrible things about the justices, but nothing that was really a crime under the freedom of expression, constitutional right, and the immunity that he has. But he was put in jail by Justice Alexandre de Moraes, and Congress confirmed at the time.
Yeah.
Under the promise, or the that it was just like to give him a. How do you say that? To teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
He's not going to be only 1 week in jail and that's it. This guy is still now in jail. 7 years later. So that was 2020. 5 years later. 5 years later, yeah. Bolsonaro, in the end of his term, pardoned him. He was set out of jail for maybe, I don't know, half a year. And a little bit more than that probably. And when Bolsonaro left office, the Supreme Court judged unconstitutional the pardon that was given by the president, and he's back to jail. Yeah. So the representatives now I don't think they would dare agree with the new prison. But of course, anybody in Brazil, not only me, that speaks up against this regime can be put in jail, can be persecuted, as I am right now. So the answer to that, I say always, is to continue speaking up, is doing my job in Congress. There are not that many that are doing it, so we need not only to do the job, but also lead people in the streets, taking to the streets. They put fear in people of going to the streets after January 8th, which was also a fraud.
Yeah. These were demonstrations after the last presidential election.
After the presidential elections, of people that were peacefully on the streets, and at some point the demonstration got out of hand. It was a Sunday, nobody was there. It was but there were people indeed that stormed into the buildings, like happened in January 6th, more or less here in America. Yeah. But I'm sure they were infiltrated. I'm sure the government, because it profited from all this turmoil, the government also did not put the forces that it should to protect the buildings. So they put fear in the people, so the people don't go to the streets, but we have to go back to the streets and demonstrate against this government. And we have to elect more senators, period. And that's why I'm running for the Senate. And like I said, I mean, I have a pretty safe run for the House if I run again. I was twice already elected with more than 250,000 votes. The first time 349, second time 256,000 votes. More than sufficient for one seat. That's 180,000 votes. I mean, the party has to have 180,000. I had in the 2 elections more votes than the party had necessary for one seat. But I'm not in politics to become a congressman for life, you know, just because.
Yeah.
I want to serve people, serve God in politics. I want to do my best where I can do best. And I think that in 2027, it's in the Senate that we will make the difference, because it is the Senate who can impeach justices of the Supreme Court. And if we don't do that, we will lose democracy in Brazil forever.
So we've had a very serious conversation for the past 20 minutes, half hour.
Okay.
That has been there's been a lot for folks to be concerned about, but there's also some hope that I want to end on, which is the Senate.
Yeah.
This is the way that you see the people of Brazil and public servants like yourself who want to make a change. This Senate run is very important. It's very important for you. It's very important for the future of Brazil. How is that race looking now? I mean, this is years ahead. I don't know.
Next year.
Next year. Okay.
October next year.
October of next year.
Yeah.
How is that race looking? Do you see where's the public sentiment of Brazil right now? Your profile's been raised. More and more people are becoming aware of this. Are you optimistic
about
I am. That?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am, and I have to, right? Because, I mean, many people talk to me on the streets and compliment for what I'm doing and what we're doing in the opposition and so on. But they also say, mostly, don't give up, right? Don't give up. Continue. Don't give in. And I say back, you can be sure I will not give up, but don't abandon me.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes when somebody says, don't give up, it means also that that person has already given up, right? Yeah. He or she is already like, you know, there's nothing else we can do. It's just so difficult. The system is so heavy and putting so much pressure. No, we have to help each other. We have to be in a whole movement together. I'm only one, right? And this is also, by the way, why it is so important and motivating for us to be heard abroad.
Yes.
This is very important. So I have to thank you for this opportunity here on the podcast, because this goes around the world. When you lose confidence in the institutions of your own country, except for, you know, some people in parliament doing their job and so on, maybe some journalists that are brave enough to stand up for what they think and not for the money they receive, which is unfortunately the case today in the larger part of the media. Oh, anyways, when you get listened to abroad and you see that there are more people interested in what's going on in Brazil and interested to help, you also gain more confidence. So, and it is an international battle.
Yeah.
Like I was last week in London in the Westminster Free Speech Forum. And I seen how many countries, including the United States, free speech is at risk. How many, you know, new bills or actions from authorities are limiting this human right, right? This free speech necessity that a human being has, and right to, you know, live in a democratic country and so on. So we have to be united. We have to be together in this, not only in Brazil, but also, you know, around the world. And hearing and this is important too, that it's resonating abroad. And then we have people that are also acting to help us in Brazil at this very difficult moment, is for us reassuring that we are on the right path to victory.
Thank you so much, Marcel, for not giving up,
Thank
for
you.
being a witness to the things that are going on in Brazil, and for introducing this to our audience. We'll keep you and all the people of Brazil in our prayers.
Thank you. God bless you. God bless your family. God bless Acton. And I'm very happy to contribute whenever I can. Thank you so much for a very good time here.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Acton or hear more of this podcast, please visit acton.org/podcasts. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.